Hey crew, welcome back to the channel. Artisan Pirate here, and in today's fun video we are back in the Hot Wheels and Nostalgia Room to talk about more recent books I have read. Now it was all the way back in the winter when we made the last books I've read video, and since then I just happened to think about it and check it on my phone. When was the last time I posted a video about books I've read? And I was surprised by how quickly time had passed, and I was also surprised that I've got 17 more books by Stephen King to talk about. Now I'm not going to draw the video out entirely too long. Please be aware that there will be spoilers about how the books end in some cases, so if there's a book here you want to read by the legendary author Stephen King and you do not want the ending spoiled, just skip over to the next book. And by all means, if this type of video is not your cup of tea, I totally understand, because I am primarily known as a woodworker. But a few years ago I did get back into reading. It all started with the iconic Jaws book, and then I jumped back into reading Stephen King. Now when I got back into Stephen King, the very first book I read by him was The Eyes of the Dragon when I got back into reading, because way back in my teens, that was the first Stephen King book I had ever read, coming off the heels of the Harry Potter series, because that was also kind of fantasy and medieval inspired as well. And it was also one of Stephen King's main villains, Randall Flagg's, his origin story. But then I wanted to read the iconic Dark Tower series, and there you see it on the top of the display case, prominently displayed. It is still, at the time of this video's recording, my favorite ever book series ever written. But then after that I started just kind of jumping around in the Stephen King archive. Here is a full list that's easily found online. It's a checklist, and you can check off whether you own or if you have read the book in that case. But after just jumping around and reading some more of his modern books like The Institute and then like Revival and things like that, I wanted to go in a chronological order. And the last time we left off, we looked at Cujo, released in 1981. So this is going to follow from Cujo on down, crew. So I'm really happy to look at all of this and share it with you. And at the time of this video's recording in early August, I have read the whole first half of the Stephen King library, and now I am currently reading Dreamcatcher, which was the first book he released for the 2000s, and I'm already a good chunk of the way into that book. But we are going to kick it off with different seasons, and I do have a cheat sheet here, so you'll see me looking down periodically, because everything kind of gets jumbled together when you read books back to back to back. I hope that makes sense. But Different Seasons has 4 different stories in it, and they associate with the 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. And the stories are Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, The Body, and The Breathing Method. And one of my favorite Stephen King movie adaptations, the original story that the source material was found from, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, is in this book. So it was great. I've seen Shawshank Redemption so many times. It's one of my favorite ever movies with Morgan Freeman in it. And I got to go and actually, for the first time ever, read the source material. And just like any movie adaptation from the page to the screen, there's so many different changes from that, and it's always fun to check them out. But then you also have Apt Pupil, which was more of a psychological story about a young boy basically in a way psychologically tormenting an old veteran who was on the wrong side of the war way back in the day. But those were my 2 favorite stories. But then The Body, it was kind of okay. It was about a group of young boys going into the woods to find a body and see it. And you know, they were just basically hiking through the woods, reminiscing on their childhood and swapping stories. But then The Breathing Method takes place in the Gentleman's Club. I do wish Stephen King would release a full novel focused on that mysterious Gentleman's Club, where people, men of note, will sit around a fireplace and swap stories. But that was Different Seasons, released in 1982. Then we have Thinner, and this is Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman, released in 1984. And this was the book that ousted Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman. This was the one where fans finally put two and two together and realized that him and Richard Bachman were one and the same. But it focuses on obese lawyer Billy Halleck, and he accidentally, with some careless driving, runs over a gypsy woman who is trying to cross the street. He wasn't paying attention. He runs her over, and then because he is a bigwig lawyer, he is able to get off with basically a slap on the wrist. But the gypsy woman's 100-plus-year-old father, who is the head gypsy, when he is coming out of the courthouse, just puts a finger on him and says, "Thinner." And through the course of the book, the obese Billy starts rapidly losing weight to where he's basically skin and bones by the end of the book, and he finds out it's a gypsy curse, and he does everything in his power to lift the curse by chasing down the gypsies. Very good book, not very long, and it does have a twist ending, so that's really cool. Then we have Skeleton Crew. This is another short story collection by Stephen King, and there were so many stories in here, and I had to actually order this one off Amazon because I didn't have it in my collection. So this is a modern paperback version. Remember, I'm trying to track down all of the nice hardback books and put them in the display case in the front room. But this one, the stories that really stuck out to me was The Mist. That is where a mist rolls into Maine, and a man and his son, they go into town and they get trapped with everyone else in a grocery store, and it's a fight for survival on what is out in the mist trying to get in. Now, the movie that came out originally for The Mist, the movie adaptation, had a very different ending than the book. That's one thing that Stephen King, I've noticed, does a lot. The book ends differently than the movie adaptation, and that's a way to where I guess he gets you into reading and watching both adaptions to see the differences. But other stories of note in here is Miss Todd's Shortcut, about a woman who finds these hidden paths to get to destinations quicker. The Jaunt is a sci-fi story, and I really liked it. I'm not a big fan of sci-fi, but I really love the concept of that story. We have Word Processor of the Gods. It's about a little boy who kind of hodgepodges a computer together, and it does some crazy things. And also The Raft, where there is a group of kids that swim out to a raft. I think it was at night. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. And then they are trapped on it by something in the water trying to get on the raft. But that was Skeleton Crew. And then one of the more iconic Stephen King books was next, and that is Misery. And this takes place in the winter, and successful author Paul Sheldon, who is coming off the heels of his highly successful Misery series based in like the medieval times and the early American times, off the heels of that success, he actually has a car wreck in the snow, and he is rescued by a retired nurse and his #1 fan, Annie Wilkes. And he finds out that she is mentally unstable when she finds out in the last Misery book, which she's reading at the time of Paul's accident, Misery actually passes away, and she's very furious at Paul, and she basically handcuffs him to the bed during his recovery from the vicious car wreck he was in and makes him write Misery's Return. All the while, Paul is trying to devise a means of escape while he is recovering. But this takes place in the same town, I believe it was, as Stephen King's famous book, The Shining. So it's kind of how it is interconnected. That is what I'm seeking on this Stephen King journey. That book, Misery, was released in 1987, a year before I was born. And another book that was released the year before I was born in 1987 was The Tommyknockers. And let me tell you, this book was a slog to get through. And Stephen King has even admitted in interviews that this is not one of his favorite books. He sees potential in the idea of what's in the book, but this was during his addiction years. He was heavily addicted to everything and the vices of life, and he was just basically out of his mind when writing this book. But for what it is a sci-fi book based in Haven, Maine, and the story's character, Roberta, goes by Bobby Anderson. She, on her property, stumbles over a piece of metallic object sticking out of her property ground out in the woods, and she starts digging it up, and it is a long buried spaceship. And she starts digging it up, and as she's digging it up, gases escape from the spaceship that's buried in the ground as more and more of it becomes uncovered, and the gases infect the town, and they start becoming like the creatures that are in the spaceship. And her pal, successful poet, and James Eric Gardner, he goes by Gard in the book, he is not affected by the gases because from a previous injury he has a steel plate in his head. So he is witnessing all of these transformations of the townspeople and Bobby's slow transformation into one of the alien creatures, but he is unaffected because of the steel plate. Again, this one was a slog to get to, but I'm thankful that I read it. And this book, as well as the next one, a lot of these books I had in my collection back when I was a teen, but I would open them up and I'd read the flap and I would not be interested in the subject matter. Now when I pick up a book that I've never read by Stephen King, I will not read the back cover. If it's got a dust jacket, I will immediately take it off, stick it in the case, and go to read it because I want it to be a surprise when I read it. But the next book, The Dark Half, this was the first book Stephen King wrote that came out during my lifetime, and that was released in 1989, and I was born in 1988. But this is a very cool book based in Ludlow, Maine. Keep in mind, Ludlow, Maine was the actual town of Pet Sematary, if we remember that one, with the Creed family and the unfortunate tale of Gage Creed being in the Pet Sematary and everything. But it follows successful writer Thad Beaumont, who writes under an alias of George Stark, and the books he releases under his actual name are not as successful as the George Stark novels. But he, just like Stephen King being Richard Bachman, Thad is ousted and is found out that he is George Stark, so he does this media coverage where he says, I'm no longer George Stark, and they do a fake funeral for the George Stark character where they're like burying the non-existent George Stark, is what I'm trying to say. But then mysterious things start happening and George Stark burst out of the empty grave. It's a manifestation, and he comes out and he is on the hunt for Thad Beaumont and his wife Elizabeth, and one of the people trying to piece everything together because everyone in town suspects that it is Thad that is doing the heinous crimes that are happening around town. Even Sheriff Alan Pangborn suspects Thad being the culprit, but he is not. It is George, and it is an ultimate fight at the climax of this book, and I was happy to finally read this one, and I really got into this one. I read this one in like a week's time. It was a real page turner for me as opposed to the Tommyknockers. The next book that we are going to look at is The Stand, complete and uncut. Now please be aware, this massive 1,000 plus page book was released by Stephen King way back in 1978, 10 years before I was born. But then later on in 1990, he released the complete uncut edition, which had an additional 300 pages in it. And I had the cut and uncut versions of this book in trade paperback, but the writing was so minuscule because it's such a long book that I picked this copy up off of Amazon, and you can see it is a sizable book. But a lot of Stephen King fans tout this as his magnum opus, his actual greatest work, standalone work. It's either this or it. Of course, the series that he's known for is The Dark Tower, but this involves Randall Flagg, who is a main character in the Dark Tower series. But in a government facility, an evil virus escapes, so kind of just think back to 2020 crew. It escapes and it lays waste to over half of the human population in the big wide world we live in. And keep in mind the time frame when this was written. There was no cell phones, there was no social media, there was nothing like that. It was just newspaper and telephone calls, you know, like a landline. But anyway, there is a fight for survival, and it's the ultimate story between good and evil. The people who are inherently good start dreaming of Mother Abigail, an elderly black lady who is at her home place, and she starts telling the people who are naturally good-hearted to come to her, and Randall Flagg actually tells people to come to him, those who are inherently evil or have a mean nature to them, to Las Vegas. But when the crew gathers at Mother Abigail's house, they go to Boulder, Colorado, which is known as the Free Zone, and they start building civilization back up. They start getting the powers back on, the generator. They start cleaning up the countless amount of bodies that was left over, you know, because everybody just kind of dropped. That was how quick the virus had, called Captain Trips. But the story's main characters that you explore the story through is Mother Abigail, Randall Flagg, again, one of Stephen King's iconic villains. Then you also have Harold Lauder and Nadine, who is on the evil side of things. And then you also have Stuart Redmond, and Franny Goldsmith. And those are the two inherently good people that you see the story through, with the ultimate fight for survival. And it bounces back and forth between telling the good side stories and telling the evil story. And again, this is a mammoth book. It is 1,152 pages in this paperback version. So I was finally glad to revisit this. I read it a long time ago when I was little, and it was great to revisit it. But next we have 4 Past Midnight. This is 4 more stories by Stephen King. You have The Langoliers, Secret Window, Secret Garden, The Library Policeman, and The Sundog. And I only particularly like 2 of the stories out of this book in the story collection. And the first one is The Langoliers. It's about a group of people that fall asleep on a flight and they wake up in yesterday. And one of the people, due to the story's nature, is a retired pilot. They land the plane and they find out what happens when yesterday happened. So everything is kind of a little bit duller, not as bright and shiny, not as cheerful, kind of just like a dull, dreary atmosphere. But then they figure out that the Langoliers is coming to devour yesterday, so today can take place. I know that's kind of like trippy, but that's the story. Found that one fascinating, as well as the characters. And then The Sundog was really interesting. It was about an old Polaroid camera, you know, those instant cameras way back in the day. I know they're becoming popular now, but the Sundog is, when you take a picture and the Polaroid comes out, the Sundog is getting closer and closer to leaping out and devouring whoever is taking the photographs. This book was released in 1990. Then we have a book I highly enjoyed when I was little, and I was happy to go back and visit it once again, and it is called The Last Castle Rock Story, and it is Needful Things. A mysterious, skinny, tall, elderly man, Leland Gaunt, sets up shop in the town, and he sells stuff at rock bottom prices. So something that you might think might be $100, he'll sell it to you for like $10, $15, with the exception of doing a small, what he calls practical joke or prank on one of the other townspeople. And all of this builds up. It just keeps building up, and the pranks are being played, and they're not good pranks at all, crew. They are terrible pranks. And finally, at the end, the town just has all-out war, and they start fighting each other, all while Leland Gaunt sits back and laughs. And one thing about this is it also has Alan Pangborn, who was in The Dark House, being a Castle Rock story, who is trying to stop, and is the only one who has not shopped at Needful Things and bought something from Leland Gaunt. He is the one who is trying to stop everything. But really had fun revisiting this book. And here is another book that we have that was released by Stephen King in 1992. Very young when these books come out, but I've had it in my collection for years. I never had a dust jacket for it, but ironically it is a first edition book, so it is in the case. I could probably print out a dust jacket for it, but I like it as is. And this one, this one's going to be hard to explain due to the guidelines for uploading videos here. This book focuses on husband and wife Jesse and Gerald Burlingame. Gerald is a highly successful lawyer, and he has just found the joys with his wife of, how can I best describe this, some bedroom games, let's just say that require handcuffs. So in an attempt to get away and not be bugged by his job of being a highly successful lawyer, they escape to their little lakeside house. And this book is more psychological than anything, and seeing what you would do to survive in the situation. But his wife gets handcuffed. Again, bedroom fun, trying to keep it as PG as possible. But she decides to opt out of it, and unfortunately her husband, Gerald, has a heart attack, and he passes away right there in front of her with her chained to the bed. And then it's just all out, just psychological warfare with Jessie as she is trying to escape and trying to figure out, because they told literally no one, family, friends, co-workers, no one, that they were going to the lake house. So it's what will Jessie do to survive? Next up, we have Nightmares and Dreamscapes, another short story collection by Stephen King, written in 1993. And this is a book, I finally remember it. I began reading it, and this was when I got out of reading in my teen years. I got about maybe 3/4 of, or maybe a third of the way through, and then I put it down, and then I just didn't read for so many years, and I wish I'd have kept at it looking back now. But Nightmares and Dreamscapes, again released in 1993. The stories that I love out of this, there's like 14 or 15, maybe up to 20 stories in this. You can see it's a sizable book. My favorite stories were Dolan's Cadillac. It's about revenge for revenge on a mobster who has unknowingly murdered a guy's wife. So it's real cool to see what he will go to get his revenge. The Night Flyer is about a vampire who has a pilot's license, and he is going from town to town doing what vampires do, and they're trying to catch him. Chattery Teeth was a really cool story. I don't want to say I really loved it, but I liked the concept of it. If you remember them little wind-up chattery teeth you could get, well, what if some of those chattery teeth at a roadside gift shop was a cannibal and could come to life? Just think about that. The 10 O'Clock People, I thought, was a really cool concept, and from what Stephen King said, this was him noticing groups of people taking smoke breaks in buildings. You know, they would gather out front as opposed to smoking in the building, and that is where this idea spawned from. I think it's a really cool concept, and I'd love to see this one fleshed out as well. And then Crouch Inn, taking place in England. Those were the stories that I liked out of Nightmares and Dreamscapes. And then another book I was so happy to revisit, and this is a Stephen King book. Either you love it or you don't like it, but it has huge Dark Tower implications in here. And this book, Insomnia, was released in 1994. Keep in mind, the final Dark Tower book, Dark Tower 7, The Dark Tower, wasn't released until 2004 is what my list says. So think how many interwoven pieces you can find in this book while Stephen King was still writing the series. It wasn't even done yet. But this story focuses on Ralph Roberts, who has recently lost his wife. He's an elderly person, and I think Stephen King likes to do a lot of younger protagonists for the story, a lot of younger people where you explore the story through or see the story through. But I am happy that he used an elderly person this time, because an elderly person 9 times out of 10 has good life experiences and knows how to get out of situations, or knows how to go about, like if they fall, how to properly bandage themselves, or you know what to look for in a person and know if they're lying or not. So really happy to have the story's main character here. But he and someone that he's always liked in his neighborhood end up fighting the forces of the Purpose and the Random in Derry, Maine. And the Crimson King is a character in this book who's one of the main bad guys in the Dark Tower series that Roland has to fight towards the end of it. But they also have the character of Ed Deepnew, and he is in the process of wiping out all of the interlopers, and Ralph Roberts is charged by these mysterious little doctors to take the fight to them and stop Ed from doing what he wants to do at the end of the book. But Ralph Roberts, as the book says, suffers from insomnia. So after a long time of just sleeping for only like 1-2 hours a night, he starts seeing these waves off of something. So like if a person is healthy, he'll see like a bright blue wave coming off of them in his sleep-deprived state, or if they're in ill health, he might see a black cloud around them, and he uses that to navigate what he needs to do in this book. Next we have one of my favorite Stephen King books ever, and it is Rose Madder, released in 1995, and it heavily focuses on domestic violence. I know this might not be everyone's cup of tea for reading a book like this, but cop Norman Daniels, he's a successful cop, and his wife Rose goes by Rosie in the book. He is abusing her through the whole first portion of the book until she finally says, "That's it, I've had enough, I'm out of here." And one day, after seeing a drop of her blood on the bed sheets, it just clicks in her head to escape Ed. She steals his credit card, she gets on a bus, and she skedaddles out of there, going cross country. It never says formally what city she goes to, but she goes to the city and sets up in the women's abuse shelter there and starts getting back on her feet. She learns some basic skills. She's a housewife who has no job, so she starts learning all these skills, and ultimately she moves out into a step-up house. So after being in the shelter, it's your first place, basically like renting a room at a boarding house is where she ends up going to. And then she tries to hawk her wedding band at a pawn shop. She finds out that even though her abusive husband said, oh, I could have bought a Cadillac for what I paid for that ring, finds out it is a fake, and she swaps it. It's still got a little bit of value being a fake with it being cubic zirconia, but with that she trades it for a portrait of a Roman. Had to think they're a Roman portrait. There is a temple on it, and there's a woman in red standing on the hill with her back towards everyone, so Rosie can't even see her face. But during all this, Norman finds out about everything, and he uses his police detective skills to track her down, and he shaves off all of his hair, he puts on a hat, puts on a glass. I think he grows a beard or shaves a beard. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but he is tracking her down. And the portrait, Rosie starts noticing as she gets more and more accustomed to being free from the abuser and everything, she notices that it starts changing in certain ways. And the portrait is one way that she finally conquers and gets rid of the abusive cop, Norman Daniels, at the end of the book. But really, really cool. Great to revisit this. Another one I read back in my teens, and it is also tied into the Dark Tower series. We've only got 4 more books to look at, crew, and the next one we're going to look at, Rose Madder, was released in 1995, by the way. Insomnia in 1994, in case I didn't say it. But released in 1996 as 6 individual serial novels, was The Green Mile, one of Stephen King's most iconic books. And if you've seen the movie, you know I've yet to see the movie because I always want to read the book. But now that I've read it, I can go back, maybe this winter, this fall, when I'm not in the shop as much, and watch the actual movie itself. But The Green Mile focuses on death row supervisor Paul Edgecombe and the gentle giant of John Coffey, not spelled like the drink, but spelled differently, as he likes to say. And the book switches from Paul when he is young and he's the supervisor to where he's old and living in a retirement home. So it bounces back and forth. And Stephen King is a master of seamlessly tying that together when he was young versus when he was old. But again, released as 6 individual novels, now as one comprehensive book. And I don't think he ever released this as a hardback that I could get and put in the display case. But then after that, we have Bag of Bones. And this is another book back in the day when I was a teen. Read the inside cover, didn't like it, couldn't remember what it was about, picked it up when it was time to read it, removed the dust jacket, and just started at page 1. But this focuses on successful writer Mike Noonan, who in the opening pages of the book, his wife has a brain aneurysm and passes away. And then due to the tragic nature and the shock factor of her just unexpectedly passing away while she was pregnant, they had been trying for a kid for so long. And one thing he finds that the ambulance people give him in her pocketbook was a home pregnancy test, and he finds out that she was with child. So this massive shock that's happened to him causes writer's block. But he's done something that Stephen King has also done in the past, and that's write books in advance. So for the next 4 years, he does not write anything and just kind of wallows in his own self-pity, which I could totally understand due to the circumstances. But then what he does is gets a book out of his safe deposit box, so his representatives at the book publishing company thinks he's writing a book as normal. But when he gives up the last book, he decides to go to his summer beach house, which he has not been to since his wife passed away, and that is at the unincorporated area of TR90. And there on his first day, on July 4th, he meets young Kyra and Maddie Devereaux. Kyra is walking down the middle of the street, bent on going to the lake. She's a little youth, I think 3 or 4 years old, and her mother comes tearing around the corner in her car trying to get it. Mike finds out that Maddie Devereaux is in a fierce custody battle with computer mogul and very elderly man Max Devereaux, who's trying to steal his granddaughter away. And Mike, being a successful lawyer and who has resources and money available, funds Maddie's actual way of getting a lawyer, going to court, and things like that. But there's so many twists and turns in this book, and a very unexpected one towards the end. I don't want to spoil too much for you all, crew, but this book was released in 1998. I was 10 years of age, so really cool. And then with this book here, it also focuses on, I think it's in Maine, but it just focuses on the psychological side of a custody battle. And in the opening pages of the book, he has a little foreword here, this author's note, where he was asked to write a good-hearted lawyer. And that's what he does in this book, a lawyer that has no hidden agenda, so to speak. But I was so happy to finally read this one, and it was another book I read in like a week's time because I just got so absorbed in the story. It took me like 3 weeks to read Tommyknockers. Again, that was just a slog to get through. But the next one is a very short one that I read in only 2 days, and this was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. You can see how short it is. It's not even 300 pages in length, but it focuses on Stephen King's love of the Boston Red Sox. As a matter of fact, the author page here is him in a Red Sox jersey. He's a huge baseball fan, I do know that. But this one focuses on Trisha, and it is more psychological horror by the master of horror. But 9-year-old Trisha, her mother and her brother are going in the woods. Her mother and father are going through a very bad divorce, and the mother, in order to keep morale up, is taking Trisha and her brother on just little day trips, you know, to the park, to the carnival, and now they're going on this hiking trip, and Trisha does have a backpack. It's full of supplies, not what she's going to need, unfortunately, but with supplies, her radio and everything, where she can listen to the Boston Red Sox game, and she's dressed in her Tom Gordon jersey because that is her favorite character, hence the name of the book itself. But in that, her mother and brother start arguing, and Trisha just kind of backs away from them, you know, on the path. And then finally, she has to step off the path to use the restroom, and when she does, she cannot find the path, and ultimately she is lost in the woods. And she basically uses her young child's imagination to conjure up Tom Gordon, and she talks to him while she's on the trail trying to find her way out. I think she ultimately spends like 2 weeks lost in the woods, but she ultimately gets rescued, and the book ends with the family being back together, mother, father, brother, and daughter. Again, a very short read. I didn't particularly care for it, but again, I'm on my journey to complete everything Stephen King has ever written. And the final book we have to look at here is another book I've had, didn't read because, again, the inside flap didn't interest me, but we have Hearts in Atlantis. And this one here, I had wanted to, since I got back on my Stephen King journey, get back into reading because it was released in 1999, and it comprises of 3 novels and 2 short stories. And the lead-off story, Low Men in Yellow Coats, introduces you to Ted Brodigan, who is a central character in the final original Dark Tower book 7, The Dark Tower. So you get to know some of his origin story. You learn that he is a beam breaker. And again, this one was released before the series had even wrapped up. So Stephen King's peppering you in with some knowledge for the Dark Tower universe. But Low Men in Yellow Coats was a very good book. And then the next story, called Hearts in Atlantis, it's about a group of kids in a college dormitory who get hooked on a game of hearts. And they are chasing the, as they call it, chasing the, a bad word for a female, let's just say it like that. They're chasing the, as they say, there's some very bad language in Stephen King books, but I just kind of, I've gotten used to it, and I kind of just gloss over it. I don't even read it in my mind when I'm reading the books. But it takes place in the 60s during the peak of the Vietnam War, and all stories kind of tie in together to where they are all interwoven. From the first story ties back into the last story in the book. But I was happy to finally read this, and as soon as I got done with this book, I picked up the next one in my Stephen King journey out of the display case, which is Dreamcatcher, which at the time of this video's recording in early August, I am currently reading, and I'm almost 200 pages into it, I believe. But I do apologize if the video has been too long, but I hope it maybe inspires you to pick up a Stephen King book if you have never read it, as I continue on my Stephen King journey. You can see I only have like 20 or so, 25 more books by the famous author to read, and then I'll be on the hunt for another book series. And I love reading a series like The Dark Tower. That way you can get really invested with the characters and grow with them as they grow with each progressive books. But other books, like let's just say standalone books like Rose Madder, I can totally enjoy those as well. So please leave your book recommendations down in the description or in the comment section below, crew. And without drawing the video out any longer, that's going to about wrap it up for this one, crew. If you're new to the channel, hopefully you'll click that subscribe button and follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. As always, links to contact me as well as all my social media feeds will always be linked down in the description box below these videos. That's about all for this one, crew. And remember, if I can make it or do it or read it, so can you all. I'm the Artisan Pirate. Take care, and I'll see you all real soon.